The tale begins on a peaceful day when our protagonist receives an unanticipated visit. As he opens the entrance to his home, he finds a girl he has never seen before. She tells him that she came earlier than normal and is very thrilled for their date, even bringing food she prepared. However, the protagonist clarifies that he doesn't know her at all. She firmly insists that she is his girlfriend and tries to step inside, but the protagonist blocks her. She begins to suspect that he is concealing something in his house, believing there might be another woman inside. The protagonist, astonished by her odd behavior, once again explains that he doesn't know her and that he doesn't have a girlfriend. He then suggests that maybe she has mistaken the apartment, and upon realizing he is telling the truth, she apologizes for the confusion. She explains that in her rush to leave home, she forgot her contact lenses and ended up confusing the protagonist with her actual boyfriend. In the end, she admits that he is in fact the boyfriend of the neighbor. A few weeks later, the protagonist hears a lot of commotion coming from the next-door unit and discovers that the neighbor is moving out. What unsettles him is that although he has seen movers carrying belongings away, he has never once seen the man of that house. Time passes quietly until one day someone knocks at his door. Not expecting visitors, he opens it and is surprised to find the same girl from before. She explains that her ex-boyfriend, the neighbor, is no longer with her because their relationship ended after she discovered he was unfaithful, bringing other girls to his apartment. That was the reason behind her strange actions during the supposed date. Now she is there because she will be his new neighbor, as she moved into her ex's apartment. She apologizes for the past misunderstanding and, wanting to make amends, brings him a cake. The protagonist, who has just finished preparing tea, takes the chance to invite her in for a cup, and she accepts with a smile as if she had already expected this outcome. Once inside, he leads her to the living room and asks her to wait while he goes to cut the cake. She requests that her slice not be too large, saying the cake was specially made for him. This seems to mark the start of a wonderful companionship between neighbors, if not for the fact that she suddenly mentions the protagonist's name, Ikuto, which is unsettling since he never told her what it was. This gives the protagonist a bad feeling. The girl then reveals she knows his name because she saw it on the building's mailboxes, and she couldn't get it out of her head since it was rather uncommon. With that, the protagonist's unease softens. Sensing the tension, she introduces herself as Yui and remarks that everything happening feels like destiny, as if they were meant to cross paths. Feeling more relaxed, the protagonist starts to think this might truly be the beginning of a decent friendship, though he still feels awkward about getting close to his neighbor's ex. Then comes the moment to taste the cake. Yui watches eagerly, waiting for the protagonist's reaction. As he takes the first bite, he is stunned by how delicious it is. Seeing this, Yui beams with joy. It had been some time since she cooked for someone important, and she was anxious about the result. But suddenly, something unusual happens. The protagonist feels an overpowering drowsiness, his eyelids growing heavier until he collapses completely. The last thing he sees is Yui softly wishing him good night. After a while, the protagonist begins to wake, sensing something warm and soft. When he opens his eyes, he finds Yui smiling at him. She casually explains that he must have dozed off in the middle of their talk, probably from exhaustion after work. Embarrassed, he quickly gets up from her lap, apologizing, though he still thinks it odd that he slept so suddenly. Yui, however, reassures him that she didn't mind. On the contrary, she enjoyed watching him rest so peacefully. Noticing that it was already late, he mentions it to Yui, who prepares to leave. Before stepping out, though, she asks if she may visit again someday, a request he agrees to, still completely unaware of the truth. When he finally finds himself alone, the protagonist notices something unusual. All the dishes have been washed, and his apartment looks tidier than normal. He figures out that Yui must have cleaned everything while he was asleep and begins to think that she is a good girl, gentle, caring, and undeniably beautiful. What he doesn't realize is that while he was unconscious, Yui did far more than just clean. She secretly took one of the spare keys to his apartment and spent that time snooping through his room. She installed microphones around the apartment, checked through his phone, and even dug into his bank records, collecting every detail she could about him. Yui doesn't merely want to be a friend. She is entirely obsessed with him. A few days later, we see Yui cheerfully washing clothes, but they aren't her own. They belong to Ikuto. As she hangs them to dry, she softly says with a sweet smile that she will become the perfect girlfriend for him. Meanwhile, Ikuto comes home and is stunned to discover all of his clothes freshly washed and hanging, with no idea who could have done it. She had entered his apartment because she now possessed a spare key. But shockingly, she didn't actually own one before. This incident frightened the protagonist so much that he asked his mother if he could stay at her place for the night, planning to figure out what happened in the morning. But that wasn't the only thing Yui had been doing. She also began following the protagonist on his way to work. With her beauty, she attracted the attention of several men, but whenever they tried to strike up a conversation or flirt, she would glare at them with contempt. Mentioning that she already liked someone, she dismissed them as trash she had no interest in. Her cold aura was so intimidating that they backed away immediately. Days passed without any major problems for the protagonist. Until one evening, an opportunity arose. As he was returning from work, Yui suddenly appeared and collided with him, causing all the groceries she was carrying to spill onto the ground. The protagonist was startled to see her there. Yui, trying to maintain her composure, remarked that she hadn't expected to run into him in that spot. While they bent down to gather her things, there was a moment when their hands touched, which made her freeze in surprise. Seizing the moment, Yui decided to take a chance. She mentioned that she had bought a lot of food and asked if he would like to have dinner with her. But before she could finish, an annoyed voice cut in, calling the protagonist senpai. It was Sadano, his subordinate, who immediately questioned who the girl with him was. Yui tried to introduce herself, but Sadano interrupted again, demanding to know if she was his girlfriend. The protagonist denied it, explaining that she was just his friend and also his neighbor. Relieved by his answer, Sadano still seemed displeased, casting suspicious glares at Yui. Sadano wasn't alone, her colleague was with her. Taking advantage of the timing, the two invited the protagonist out for drinks, leaving Yui behind. With a forced smile, Yui told him goodbye, saying he shouldn't worry about her. This irritated Sadano, who couldn't accept that her senpai was so close with Yui. Sadano then hurried the protagonist and her companion away. At that moment, it became clear, both women despised each other, each determined to win the protagonist for themselves. Later, at the bar where they went drinking, the first topic that came up was an accident. Upon hearing this, Sadano admitted she didn't want to go home alone. The protagonist, however, still worried about Yui, wondering if she was safe since she had left by herself. Noticing his concern, Sadano confronted him, telling him to enjoy their outing instead of worrying about that girl, because she would be fine. What he should be focusing on, she insisted, was the person sitting right in front of him. Sadano then invited him for another drink. Meanwhile, Yui was secretly listening to every word of their conversation. She was trying to collect as much information as possible about Sadano, learning that she was 24 years old and lived alone. Knowing this, Yui silently vowed that she would do whatever it took to keep Sadano away from her beloved. A few hours went by, and the group of friends kept on drinking. Then suddenly, the protagonist's friend went to the bathroom. Seizing the chance, Dano invited the protagonist to keep drinking, but this time just the two of them in private. However, the protagonist sensed she had other motives, so with no choice he turned her down, saying that they were both a little tipsy and could talk about it another time. With that, the outing wrapped up, and the group went their separate ways. Dano left with the protagonist's colleague, who offered to walk her to the station. As they strolled, the toxic bond between them became visible. The man was being extremely polite, yet Dano showed zero interest. When they reached a shop, the colleague went inside to buy something to drink, leaving Dano waiting outside. Suddenly, she received a call from an unknown number. Seeing the caller was persistent, she decided to answer. To her shock, it was him on the other end of the line, asking if she had enjoyed the gathering. Dano didn't back down and instead confronted him, congratulating him for managing to get her number. But it didn't take long before he made a demand, warning her to stay away from his beloved if she didn't want to get hurt. Dano only laughed, saying he shouldn't bother worrying about her since they were just having fun as co-workers. With that, Yui decided she would keep an eye on her for now, to make sure she stuck to what she said. When the protagonist's colleague returned from the store, Dano suddenly claimed she had changed her mind about what she would do, signaling the situation was about to shift. Switching perspectives, the protagonist was already preparing to sleep after a long day when he heard knocking at the door. With no other choice, he opened it, and found his two co-workers. What surprised him was that one of them was carrying Dano, who was extremely drunk. His colleague explained that after the protagonist left, they kept drinking, and that was how Dano ended up like this. Since he didn't know her address and had to wake up early the next morning, he brought her here and left her in the protagonist's care. Now, the protagonist had no option but to look after her. He guided her to the living room and, seeing it was late, suggested they sleep, he would stay on the couch, and she could use the bed. But Dano wasn't willing to let the night end without progress. She boldly suggested they sleep together. The protagonist, startled, pushed her away, insisting he would stay on the couch because she was drunk and he didn't want to take advantage of her. With that, he eventually fell asleep, leaving Dano irritated that nothing happened. Hours passed, and she still hadn't fallen asleep, her disappointment growing. That was when she remembered Yui's warning call, telling her not to get close to her beloved. As expected, Dano refused to let that pass. She wouldn't allow another girl to take the place of being the girlfriend of the man she wanted. That's why she decided to act while the protagonist slept, to turn their relationship from something plain into something deeper. But while she moved, someone was secretly watching her from the shadows. Dano leaned in, intending to give him a kiss. Realizing there would be no proof of the moment, she grabbed her phone to capture it. While adjusting the camera, a silhouette appeared. Noticing it, she turned around, but terror struck her before she could react. The figure silently attacked and dragged her out of the protagonist's apartment. And as expected, that shadow could only be Yui, who would never allow anyone else to approach her beloved. Only she had that right. When the protagonist awoke, the first thing he realized was that Dano was no longer in his home. Suddenly, he received a message where Dano thanked him for everything he did the previous night. She explained that she left before he woke up to avoid causing trouble. But the message was not from Dano. It was from Yui, who declared that from now on, she would protect him from any girl who tried to get close. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. It was Yui, who came to check on him, thinking he might be hungover after the outing. This show of concern made the protagonist feel reassured, but what she said afterward unsettled him. She admitted she had been eager to see him but didn't want to give the wrong impression. Her hints, however, were quite direct. After that, Yui asked him a serious question in a tense atmosphere: "Did you invite someone to your house?" The protagonist explained that Dano had stayed over because she was very drunk, and that was all. Yui seemed relieved at his answer, but out of curiosity, he asked how she knew Dano had been there. She replied it was just a guess, but used the moment to advise him never to bring other girls into his apartment again. She firmly stated that it wouldn't happen anymore, since she didn't know any other girls besides Dano. Yui then mentioned she needed to return to her store, which she had left open. The protagonist, surprised, asked about the store. Yui revealed that she owned a small pastry shop called Luna Nova. He had already suspected it, given how delicious her cakes were, especially the one he received before. Yui invited him to stop by when he had time, promising she would personally serve him. With that, she said goodbye, leaving the protagonist eager to visit her soon. But before he could act, he got a message from a coworker asking if Dano had made it home. The protagonist replied that she had left very early, but apparently, his coworker hadn't been able to reach her since morning. That seemed odd. Meanwhile, at her shop, Yui was happily preparing a cake. She smiled as she read a message on her phone: the protagonist thanking her for caring about him and asking if he could visit her pastry shop the next day. After finishing the cake, she calmly descended a staircase that led to a basement. There, she stopped in front of a reinforced door. Inside the secured room, someone was anxiously waiting to eat the cake. And that someone was none other than Dano, who now had to be taught a lesson about never getting in Yui's way.